Welcome to the Don't Panic, It's Just Data podcast, where we have a weekly conversation with people impacting the enterprise tech landscape. My name is Christina Stathopoulos, and I will be your host today. After building out an advanced analytics career in big tech, I am now the founder of Dare to Data, on a mission to help individuals and corporations take the next step in their data and AI journey. Today, I am speaking with Rahul Rastogi, SingleStore's Chief Innovation Officer, about rethinking real-time analytics. Welcome, Rahul. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. It's wonderful to have you on, and I've been really looking forward to our conversation. I want to start by setting the stage. I know you come from an extensive background in big tech. You've witnessed firsthand how data strategies have evolved with the rise of AI. So drawing from your experience in these large-scale, data-rich environments, what fundamental shifts have you observed in how organizations use data, and especially over the past couple of years as AI has really come to the forefront?
I think that's a great question, Christina. So, just to take a step back, real time and the need for real time is not new. Again, if I really go back to late 1990s, when .com was at its peak, I used to work for a small startup. And we used to do real-time bid-ask exchanges, okay? And that was the first time I sort of got introduced to the importance of real-time data. Okay, as you can imagine, if you're trying to create a marketplace and you're trying to sell a commodity, people are coming and bidding on it, and you're doing matches in real time. So that's the easy part. But one of the interesting things that we did there was how do you give tools to the sellers to do pricing based on inventory and the interest in the market. Okay, so that was sort of my first exposure into real time, that as you're aggregating the demand in the market, you could deploy some very interesting pricing strategies based on history, based on available, quantity that you have to sell, and you're changing pricing in real time. So that was sort of intriguing to me, but I feel that was the first exposure I had with how you can use real-time data. And I'm talking about this is 25 years ago. But since then, as I've sort of, progressed in my career with some of the big techs and some now with SingleStore, I feel the real-time has, sort of become sort of an absolute necessity. And I think when I think of real-time, I try to break it into, a few broad categories, okay? So, for example, the most obvious use case of real time is when you're going after use cases where as the data is coming in, you're driving some analytics and you're driving decisions based on that. Okay. And a good example could be fraud detection. Okay. Or it could be global trade compliance. Okay. Whereby you don't want to sell to some entities based on the type of product or the characteristics of the entity. Okay, so that I think is one genre of real time, and you can't argue that. And I think as we're getting more and more into this AI-driven space, data substrate is becoming all more important. Okay, you want to have access to data as quickly as you can so that you can drive decisioning. Okay, for AI-driven applications. The second category, in my view, is, sometimes, when you bring the data in, okay, data is not consumable in its current form. You have to do a lot of enrichment and you have to do a lot of transformations to the data, okay? So faster you get the data, more time you have to do your, transformations, enrichments, apply business logic, compute metrics or measures, whatever you want to call them, and then make it available for consumption. Okay, so there is heavy element of data processing that is involved. Okay, and so it is better, or it's in the best interest of any corporation to bring the data as quickly as it gets generated into their analytic environments so that they can organize the data and create these structures to make it available for consumption. Because if you go with the traditional approach that I'm going to bring the data once a day, or I'm going to bring data once an hour or once in 2 hours, then the likelihood that you're going to miss your SLAs or whatever your SLAs are to deliver, data for dashboards or reports, might get impacted, because not always data is clean. Okay, there are very complex transformations that companies do to achieve the desired results. And the third category, in my view, where real time becomes very important is, gone are those days when people are looking at the data and say, yep, give me a report. Okay, and I'm going to look at a report and I'm going to plan what my day would be. People have actually, companies have built business processes. Okay, so their daily, how they function on a daily basis, or an hourly basis depends on flow of data. So their business processes are heavily dependent on how quickly they're able to get access to the data. So to me, when I think of real time, I've seen evolution in all these three categories, okay, which is what is defining and making real time all the more important and critical in the industry today.
And you've already alluded a bit into the next question that I had for you. And you especially started off, like you said, I think the 90s, you were already witnessing this real-time analytics, but I think a lot of companies have seen the shift happen a little bit slower. And that shift is moving from analytics and static reports to this streaming intelligence. So the question for you is, how have advances in technology change the landscape? So essentially enabling businesses to pivot in real time rather than looking back at this stale, outdated data.
Yeah, I think you sort of, your question actually has the answer embedded in it. There has been so many advancements in technology, simple thing like streaming. Okay, streaming used to be sort of, things that people used to just talk about, and it was very esoteric in nature. But now, there are streaming technologies, messaging technologies like Kafka and Spark streaming. So that actually, these technologies allow you to source the data while it is on the flow. Then there are technologies in the market which allow you to actually process the data while it is in the flow. You can do simple aggregations, you can do simple, sort of lookups and joins, okay, and you can serve it up, okay. The separation of compute from storage and elasticity in the compute, and especially as we have witnessed with CSPs, it allows, that capability. People don't have to go and deploy these complex architecture. They can leverage these managed services, whether it's managed Kafka or, Kinesis or whatever that might be. They can leverage these things to focus on connecting to source and focus on business logic while the data is in flow. That's one side of the equation. The second side of the equation is, how do you have a data platform that scales and allows you to consume this data, enrich this data, transform this data, and make it available for access through various patterns, whether it is through APIs, whether it is through, your standard, BI tools, or through integration with consumers, which could be a machine or could be a human or could be an application. So I think these evolution in the technology with scale, simplicity, through managed service, okay, and abstracting and the abstraction and the creation of frameworks, all these technologies allow creation of real-time applications a lot more easier.
Yeah. And funny question for you. I assume that it's much easier now than it was in the 90s, right? I can't imagine what it was like working with the tech.
I think it is certainly, there are a lot more options, again, and
Yes.
maybe I'm sort of dating myself. At that time, when you thought of real time, the only option you had was, well, again, at least the one that I was exposed to was TIBCO's Rendezvous. Okay, hey, there's a message bus and you create these, packets and you broadcast it and there's a listener on the side. And that was like, sort of, as if you're going to the moon. Okay, that was the only option that is available. But now I think you come across so many different, advancements, through open source. And some of these companies are really trying to solve these problems with scale, problem with simplicity, problem with speed. And it just made this ecosystems so rich with options that there is something available for any sort of problem that you want to solve today.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that, the evolution of technology, these legacy systems, because oftentimes what happens is the legacy systems stand in the way. So what makes that older infrastructure so ill-suited for real-time analytics? And why do they slow organizations down just when really they need to do the opposite? They need to move faster.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a hard question, and I think there's no right answer here. Okay. So Yeah, I think there are some inherent disadvantages in some of the legacy technologies. These are monolithic. There were days when mainframes used to be sort of the gold standard. Okay, monolithic systems, and these monolithic systems, they were designed for doing one thing well. Okay, either they can do transaction processing very well. Okay, and reporting and analytics was always an afterthought. Okay, let's make sure that we have a system that can capture a system of record. We can do a financial close. We can ship a product, okay, et cetera, et cetera, those business processes. So most of these systems, like ERP systems of the past, were designed for that, okay? But now I think as analytics is becoming a lot more pervasive, okay, it's a challenge for companies who are so heavily invested and their business processes are built around these legacy systems to completely discard all the goodness that those technologies bring and to move towards more modern architecture. These transformations are not easy. These are they cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for corporations, and not to mention the impact it has on the change management within the workforce. So companies, I think, are taking a very measured approach, and you've seen this from several companies like, IBMs of the world and SAPs of the world. They all are bringing in technologies that make it easier for people to move data from their ERPs or supply chain planning systems, make it easier to move the data, and then move towards a more modern cloud data platform, whether it is on premise or it is on cloud. Most of them are on cloud. So they're making it easier for corporations to move the data from their legacy sources, okay, and then employ more modern techniques, okay, like streaming to the world, scalability and elasticity in the data platforms to service these newer use cases. Some companies have actually, tried, and this has been sort of a debate I used to have all the time, that can we have a system that can do OLTP and analytics well, okay? And the answer is yes and no. The workload characteristics are very, very different for an OLTP system compared to an analytics system. The data models are very different, third normal form versus, star schema or snowflake schema, whatever that might be. So sometimes, these same technology cannot solve both, but there are certain genre of use cases where OLTP and analytics can coexist. And this has been sort of, an exciting area for me, and obviously for our company, SingleStore, where we feel that not for all your OLTP, but for where real-time, data processing, operational data stores where the data is changing quite rapidly and you want to build analytics on top of that, we call them STAP databases. Those capabilities, are becoming real. Okay, customers are recognizing that, and they are imagining, pretty amazing use cases that they're deploying on these technologies now.
And I want to circle back on one thing that you mentioned about really like the operational headaches of having to move away from this legacy tech. Because essentially companies want a simpler, more scalable path forward. So what new innovative approaches or architectures do you find most promising today? And also along those lines, how can organizations achieve this continuous intelligence without incurring the massive operational headaches that might come with it?
Yeah. I think, again, great question, Christina. So the way I think we are solving this problem, within SingleStore is we want to make it easier, okay, for customers to connect to any source, okay, and to bring the data in, okay, for analytics, whether it is lookups, whether it is, aggregations, joins, transformations. So we are sort of doubling down on this whole data management, okay, and we call this product as Single Connect as an example, where your source could be, any database, whether it is MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, do a very simple CDC, okay, you should be, so without having to write these heavy connectors, okay, the product does the heavy lifting of reading the data, and then have a very simple way for people to configure pipelines on top of that. Okay, so CDC in helps you read the data. You can have write a couple of lines of code, and you get able to create pipelines that actually moves the data in. But we're not stopping here. Some of the things that we are actively working on, that if people have data sitting on in a legacy system that we can read through a CDC, or they have data, let's say they've parked the data in a S3, or there's data sitting, in their message bus like Kafka. Okay. Can we do schema inference? Okay. So it's all about how do we make it easier in this data management space to read a packet of data, do schema inference, identify what the target model should be for consumption of the data, and allow people to, remove this heavy engineering that they have to do the data movement and data processing piece. So that's where we feel we want to spend more and more of our energy and time. And I think this is going to become sort of table stakes with the advancement in the AI, where data substrate is becoming more and more important. Okay. You don't know what you don't know until you see the data. Okay. So you want to make it easier for people to bring the data in, consume the data, explore the data, learn from the data, and then incorporate it to drive your application behaviors.
Yeah. So getting real-time analytics right today is really what sets the stage for tomorrow's breakthroughs in AI-driven decision-making. And we're going to dive deeper into real-time AI with Madhukar from SingleStore in the next episode. But for now, can you please share with us how a well-laid analytics foundation can help ensure that businesses are ready to embrace this next wave of AI innovations?
I think it all starts with data. You got to know your data. No technology can solve the problem. Okay, you have to know your data. You have to know what you want to get out of the data. Where the technology can help, it can actually really help you accelerate your development. Like, if it is and sourcing, so use the right methods for sourcing the data, and what we are doing with the Single Connect platform, where we can connect to diverse set of databases and sources and applications to bring the data, make it easier for customers to model the data, process the data, and then the magic is all within the database. Okay, that once you have a data platform that allows you to scale, allows you to do processing of data as the data is flowing in, whether it is you're trying to do a join, like a three-way join or n-way join, to create a data structure that feeds your applications, or it feeds your, AI applications. So there, I think the beauty is in the ease of use and the scalability and the performance characteristics of the underlying data platform. So that's something that people have to do. And I would say, I think the last thing is more around, going back to know your data. I think that's important, because one of the problems I see with corporations, that they don't spend a lot of time in creating reusable data products. They may do, okay, hey, I have this application and this application need this data, so let's just create a data structure that feeds it. Okay. And the new use case comes up, and it's always easy to create something new. But this is where, take a step back and see how you want to create enterprise data models. You want to create, multi-purpose data structures, so that you're driving consistency of your data definitions. You're going after, data governance, measures, where you look at the data quality, data timeliness. So those are factors which are, certainly, technology can help. Okay. But this is where knowing the data and the process and governance aspects also become very important. And I feel that if the technology enables you to do these things well, either through frameworks or utilities or capabilities, that's part of the solution. But rest all falls on having the mindset that data is an important asset, and we got to treat it with care. Okay, and we need to employ the right methods and techniques to ensure the accuracy of it and the currency of it, and comply with compliance and governance rules, because all these things are going to become all more important as more applications are teed off data.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's all about the data.
It's all about.
Now we're approaching the end of our episode. Do you have any last words that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think this is a great topic, and I think I'm sure there are different perspectives. But one more perspective I wanted to add, that AI thing is real time. Yep. How do we bring the data real time? But the other aspect, that people should consider is how do we make the user experience better in consuming the data? Okay, so there it is less about real time. Yep, real time as you have the data, most current data available. But the area that people should think about, you want to deploy applications where there is user experience is not compromised. And we are living in the age where people are so used to using applications on phone where the responsiveness of the application is so fluid, and that is what people expect to get out of all data products or applications that you create on data. What they forget that on a phone you're dealing with maybe 100 rows of data, okay, or hardly any data, but whereas these analytic applications, sometimes they have to comb through billions of transactions. But that's not the problem. That's problem for us. How do we solve the problem? So high concurrency, low latency to drive consumer experience, okay, in the applications is very, very critical. Okay, and this is something that I lived by at my previous role, in my previous job. And this is what actually makes analytics easy for consumption, and adoption becomes easier by consumers. And the good news is SingleStore actually does that quite well. We take pride in real-time processing, but we also take pride in really low latency access. Imagine if you're in an application and you're trying to go from screen to screen or click to click, and the response time for the feedback or data is coming back to in 10, 15, 20, 30 milliseconds. That's just nirvana state. So that's something I would say, it is real time is great, but real time with high concurrency, low latency actually is the total package, is how I think people should think about it.
Yeah, that's a nice little point to add on at the end about the accessibility, the user experience. Thank you so much, Rahul, for joining us today. I appreciate you coming on, and I loved our conversation. I learned some new things along the way. And also thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. For further information on what we've talked about, please head over to SingleStore.com. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head on over to em360tech.com.